We might be about to see a flood of money printing hit the markets over the next couple of months as we have a ton of changes to both monetary policy and fiscal policy coming down the pipeline. And I'm going to show you every single one. And then we'll talk about how that might impact both the markets and the economy as all of that easing makes its way through the financial system.
앞으로 몇 달간 막대한 유동성이 풀릴 계획입니다. 오늘 참고한 유튜버 헤러 씨는 이를 통화정책과 재정정책이라는 두 가지 큰 축으로 나눠서 분석합니다. 그 첫 번째, 미 연방준비제도 즉 Fed의 통화정책 변화부터 자세히 살펴보시죠.
So first up, we have changes to the Federal Reserve's balance sheet. You can see that their balance sheet has been declining for the last couple of years, and at their last meeting, they announced that that will be coming to an end. In other words, this flat line on their balance sheet that you saw from 2015 through 2017, where their balance sheet didn't change, is what the Fed is saying is going to happen from here. Now, on the surface, that might look like there's no quantitative easing and there's no quantitative tightening, which means there should be no net impact to the overall economy. And technically, that is true. But at the same time as they end quantitative tightening, they will also be engaging in a new sort of operation twist, where they're going to be changing what they hold on their balance sheet. So the first step in this process is obviously ending the quantitative tightening. So that will have somewhat of an easing effect on the market itself because they're not going to be withdrawing liquidity from the financial system anymore. But starting December 1st, they will continue to bleed mortgage-backed securities off their balance sheet, and they will take that money and roll that over into buying T-bills. So while this will continue to drain money out of the mortgage-backed securities market, it will replace that into T-bills, which is used for fiscal policy, giving the government the ability to spend and borrow more at cheaper rates in order to print that money, spend it into the economy. Again, there is no net change on the overall financial system and economy from this, but it is taking liquidity out of one area of the market and injecting it into another broad area of the market through the government. So that means continued tightening in mortgage-backed securities, but easing everywhere else. And given the fact that the White House is currently touting the idea of a 50-year mortgage, if that does come to pass, that should offset any of the effects of the tightening in U.S. housing that will continue to be experienced by the Fed's tightening of mortgage-backed securities.
연준의 양적 긴축 종료와 MBS를 T-빌로 퇴전하는 오퍼레이션 트위스트를 통한 통화정책 변화를 짚어봤습니다. 이는 사실상 통화정책이 완화 쪽으로 기울고 있다는 신호로 해석됩니다. 이어서 두 번째 큰 축인 재정정책 변화로 넘어가 미국 재무부 일반 개정과 정부 셧다운 종료가 시장에 어떤 유동성 효과를 가져올지 자세히 살펴보겠습니다.
Okay, the next few areas of easing you should expect to see on the economy and the markets all have to do with the government shutdown ending. And the first one comes from the government's checking account itself. This is the Treasury General Account. Looking at the last couple of months, you can see that the government has spent the last few months rebuilding the balance inside the Treasury General Account. This is where all the money from taxes and borrowing goes into and all the money that they spend goes out of. As a result of the government shutting down, they have been spending a lot less than normal, but still taxing and borrowing the same amount, which means their balance has started to get a lot higher than where they like to keep it around $850 billion. But as soon as this government shutdown ends, all that money that has not been getting spent will just get spent. And that's to make up for all the lost spending along the way, all the paychecks that went unpaid and everything like that. Now, this process does take a long time. So even if the government shutdown does end soon, which it looks likely to, if by the time you're watching it, it's not already ended already, it still takes quite a bit of time to get everything back up and running again. So it's not going to be an instant boost, an instant flood of money into the economy, but over the next couple of weeks and couple of months, we're likely to see an easing effect from all that captured cash that was getting sucked out of the market back in. This should also likely result in a little bit of bullish price action in the stock market overall, because recently we've had hundreds of thousands of people who haven't been getting paychecks, which means they haven't been making their 401k contributions and may have even been selling off assets in order to pay the bills along the way while they wait to get reimbursed. Because government shutdowns don't actually save taxpayers money, they actually cost us more because we have to pay back all those people for all those paychecks for all that time that they weren't even working. Now, all else being equal, assuming there is nothing else that offsets this, this would be a bullish force on the market. Now, the next thing coming out of the current administration in terms of stimulus is a $2,000 stimulus check. I mean, not stimulus check, don't call it that. It's a tariff rebate. Now, it is true that the United States is currently collecting quite a bit more money in tariffs than it has in past years. Currently, the US government has collected a couple $100 billion in tariffs. But a couple $100 billion in tariffs is absolutely nothing compared to the $7 trillion the US government spends every year. And not only is it spending $7 trillion every year, it is borrowing $1.7 trillion because it cannot tax the economy enough to pay for all that reckless spending. So there's no surplus happening from this $200 billion. Maybe it'll end up being $300 billion worth of tariffs. And that's assuming the Supreme Court doesn't strike it down. And so there is no tariff rebate to be talked about here. There is no extra income. There is no surplus. There's no balanced budget here. Tariffs are a tax, and if they take that money that they tax and they just send that out as stimulus checks, they are paying for it through borrowing. Because again, they're not taxing enough in order to fund all of the spending, which means if they send that money that they just taxed out, it's funded by more borrowing. And if you know anything about the way the dollar works, when money is borrowed, it is lent into existence, which means as the government runs deficits, that is money printing. Now, if this happens, it's not going to be every individual, and it's not even going to be every household. But out of the 340 million Americans, let's say 100 million of these $2,000 checks get sent out. The cost of that would be roughly $200 billion, wiping out any of the fiscal gains that the tariffs brought in the first place. And if you remember anything about what happened to markets the last time the last president and the current president in his last term sent out stimulus checks, then you know, first, it trickles right back up because it hits asset prices almost immediately. Fuels speculation, fuels bubbles, and then it drives up the prices of goods and services, so it drives inflation higher. All right, and then the last change that is coming to the economy and markets soon is the reshaping of the leadership of the Federal Reserve. We know that the current administration in the White House wants rates to be a lot lower. We also know that Federal Reserve Chairman Powell is on his way out next year. He will no longer be the chairman. He is getting replaced. His term is over. We see people like Hassett saying that he would accept the chair job at the Fed and he wants lower rates. We've heard the same sentiment from other people as well. And given the fact that it is the US president, and given the fact that it is the US president who nominates who the Senate votes on for the Fed chair position, we are likely to see people nominated who want lower rates. But it's not just the chair position that is opening up. We also just got news that Atlanta Fed President Bostic is leaving his position when his term expires in February. That opens up a new spot on the Federal Reserve for a new person who wants lower rates. And don't forget, we have the ongoing drama with the Federal Reserve's Lisa Cook, and the Supreme Court will be ruling whether or not Trump has the authority to fire her. If that goes through, again, that will be yet another position opened up to place somebody else who again wants lower rates. And so within all of the ranges of possible outcomes with the leadership at the Federal Reserve, we are seeing the leadership there being somewhat reshapen as people are being replaced with others who want lower rates, just like the White House does. Now, everything that we've talked about so far, the Fed ending QT and starting a soft stealth QE through an Operation Twist, the government shutdown ending, all those paychecks, people starting to invest again, the $2,000 stimulus checks, the 50-year mortgages, and the Federal Reserve's leadership being reshaped, all these by themselves are not huge impacts on the market. I think a lot of the volatility we've seen over the last couple of weeks has been due to the government shutdown and the lack of liquidity we've had from that. And so the government shutdown ending will likely have the most acute effects, at least in the short term. But all these together, again, are not massive. Stack them up together though, and over the next 6 to 12 months, we are entering into a time period that is much, much, much easier, monetarily speaking, than it has been for years now. And given the current level of fear in the market, I don't think people are prepared for what a much easier financial environment will do to the markets and the economy overall.
지금까지 미국 경제와 암호화폐 시장을 뒤흔들 4가지 유동성 공급 요인을 자세히 분석해봤습니다. 4가지 요인들이 바로 연준의 양적 긴축 종료와 오퍼레이션 트위스트, TGA 현금 유입, $2,000 리베이트 발행, 그리고 연준 지도부 교체입니다. 허스의 결론처럼 이 개별적인 변화들이 합쳐져 향후 6개월에서 12개월 동안 시장에 어떤 영향을 미칠지 미리 대비하는 것이 중요할 것 같습니다. 오늘 영상이 여러분의 투자 통찰력을 넓힌 데 도움이 되셨다면 구독과 좋아요를 눌러주시길 부탁드립니다. 다음에도 유익한 영상으로 찾아뵙겠습니다.